Here's Dan trying to play the melodica with varying amounts of success. It's like a church organ. Okay. So we're Dan Shipsides and Beggs, and we've just made a contributed a work to a show here in Nantes, and we're just going to try and make a little video, sort of walk through video, and say a few things about the piece as we go. And you just see it's well, as you come in, looks like that. And we've made this sort of wolf mobile.
Mobile, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's balanced on an arrow. It's balanced on a bomb. There's a kind of pivot point on a 6-pointed star. These wolves kind of just rotate around the space, hovering, rising and falling. But they're projections, obviously. It's kind of a very simple projected work. I suppose you saw the idea of the screen and the image and projections of good and bad, and the wolf being the kind of, I suppose, a metaphor in many senses for the threat. But in actual fact, wolves are quite good for the environment and things like that. So there's always kind of like a double coding in these works. Mm-hmm. And they're quite childlike. I think something throughout all the works we've got here, there's a very kind of childlike style of imagery, which I think in many ways is to try and open it out to a kind of less didactic kind of reading, perhaps. So this gets kind of brighter as obviously the day gets darker.
Yeah, the show becomes much more animated as the light decreases. As you can see, we've got a lot of daylight here, and it's winter time, so quite soon the light just drops away, and the piece becomes much more animated. And here we've got some kids doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is tampering with things, and they're playing around with it, which is good. This device that they're using here is an old cranky, which is an old well, it's used in many cultures as a sort of early form of storytelling, of narrative, probably post-film, and it gets used a lot in folk culture. So we've decided to develop this, and then we would film. We'd make the cranky, and then film it. And around the back of the sculpture here, we've got a film of that cranky. We always call the project Still Not Out of the Woods, but this particular one is called Notamum, which is a sort of subtitle, and that relates to an old song. So anyway, that's the cranky, and then we film it through a kaleidoscope, and then this sort of changes it. Oh, it's okay, c'est pas grave. Yeah. Yes, let's do that. So, well, this is an evolving piece, which started off with, I guess it started off with the notion of melodicas, which Melodicas, these instruments, and they're specific in that they utilize, you blow, you use air from your lungs, you blow into them, and there's little reeds inside which do that. And at the time we first started to use melodicas, there was a lot of on the news, a lot of talk about boat people, about Syrians crossing the Mediterranean, people from Africa crossing the Mediterranean, and in whatever type of boat they could. And often, sadly, these people would drown, the boats would capsize and they would drown. And for some reason, we made a connection between the notion of the life jacket and the melodica, and we thought and we may still do this, to connect a melodica to a life jacket. And so the air from the life jacket gives you just about 20 seconds or 30 seconds of playing a melody, after which the life jacket is deflated and the inevitable happens. So we also then thought, well, we could do it with a rubber ring as well. So we found this old tractor tire and we filled it up. So it's a similar sort of idea, but the work doesn't necessarily have to stay within that idea. It's what you see. It's a rubber ring, a large tractor tire with two melodicas attached to it, and we can play these. And what's also nice is that you can, well, as it's a bit too much pressure in there, but as you drop the pressure down, you can get nice waves of drones happening and all sorts of things. This globe here, the sun. It's a rather spontaneous work, just a globe that we've painted with the sun on it. And from a British perspective, this could be seen as a tabloid newspaper. But also it simply is a ball with the sun. It's like the sun. And up there we have the globe, planet Earth, on the top of this rather scary, well, for me it's quite a scary sort of totem object. And we've just got the globe up on there, so it's a sense of a sort of global nightmare, really, of a sort of a mound of war. Anyway, I'll pass you to Dan.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean the mound, I mean, it's got several references in it. I think one that's maybe quite strong or comes from some of our experiences on summits where there will be a cross, usually a Christian cross. So there's also connects to Caspar Friedrich's paintings, for example, of mountain crosses. So these kind of connections are there, of how summits have become metaphorical or symbolic. But I don't know, we've always kind of played around with ideas of summits not always being as uplifting, if you like, or morally uplifting. So the concept of kind of summits and war and politics become quite present. And you think of the word summit being used in lots of political kind of dimensions in terms of political gatherings of the world's leaders. But also we were mountaineering a few years ago in Italy, in the Dolomites, where the summits were very instrumental in terms of the battle during the war front during World War One. So these summits there were very much kind of militarized, to the point where whole platoons were stationed on summits with the big guns. So the idea of summits being strategically important in warfare, historically, but very particularly with that war. So there are a lot of kind of things that come together. The idea of summits being, on that level, quite a horrific, spooky place. So this is really a kind of pile of bones, pile of bombs, pile of wood, kind of a wood stock. And the kind of voodoo-ness, I think, of the cross, or the barbed wire cross, and the banjo and all these things, they kind of connect to this idea of kind of Christian, but also maybe a more pagan or kind of voodoo-y kind of connection of symbolic places. So the cross becomes barbed wire. And the idea of barbed wire and fences is something we've played with quite a lot in our work, in terms of borders, in terms of partitions, in terms of the kind of politics of it, but also in terms of the wire becoming something to do with music. So this kind of wire comes down, and it comes down into a banjo string. So the idea of music facilitated by the wire is kind of very important. And then back down to the cranky that Neil's spoken about. But another thing about these screens, a bit like the kind of wolf projections on the kind of mobile, is the kind of concept of the screen and how much of our formative understanding of the world comes through the screen. So the idea of storytelling is such a kind of key thing, and obviously one of the strongest things to shape and manipulate and to, I guess kind of inform people in a kind of mass way. So the screen becomes this idea of projection, becomes this idea of communicating in a kind of mass way to a larger audience. So this particular little story kind of generally follows kind of quite dark ideas of threat, violence, and then we've got the barbed wire kind of protecting against the kind of perceived threat of the wolves. Then you've got this kind of moment of, I suppose, euphoria, which turns into kind of a bit of a modernist nightmare of bicycle, the peloton, the speed, the masculinity.
This is probably where we came in, sort of post-war, sort of 1950s, 1960s.
Well, 70s for me.
70s for Dan, and 60s for me, that's where I was born.
And then the kind of, I suppose, the rise of modernism, the bicycle, its connection to, lots of things really. But then this goes kind of even quite dystopian, and to the point where we can imagine the population becoming zombified by the screen. Mass culture population, and into the wire internet age of a kind of utopian vision, which lasts only a very short while before we realise everything's connected but disconnected and controlled by something we don't understand. It's jammed.
There we go.
To the point where we really are still not out of the woods.
That's well timed, Dan.
Stop! At it!
Yes.
Okay.
And all of as I said before, nearly all, we basically just have one project, and a few years ago we made a work in Italy called Still Now Out of the Woods, which is made of wooden twigs that we found on the ground, and we stuck it between two trees on string. And this has become kind of our one work, so to speak.
It's a work that encompasses, many, many different ways of working, like the cables, the wires, the idea of summits, the idea of, I guess, a perceived threat or a projected threat, but also kind of music,
yes.
And attempts to find some kind of freedom from the woods, if you like.
Yeah. And so whilst all the works, or the project, the Shipsides and Beggs Project, the overall title is Still Out of the Woods, every little work within that has its own little title. And this particular mound at the moment is, or the video at the back, should we say, which is an old English folk song, which I think was migrated to America, and then through a kind of the folk revival, it became Bob Dylan came across it and then turned it into his song, which is a popular song called Masters of War, and and we've written the words to that song here, and it's very pertinent today with all of the fear around war, etc., and the instability in the world. So we've written these songs out, and we've written these words out.
And at the vernissage, we performed a kind of set of music, kind of some of it soundscape, some of it morphing into these songs. This song, or these two songs, and also War Pigs by Black Sabbath. So it was quite an eclectic barrage, probably, of noise.
Yes, probably with this video, we'll probably when we do the edit of the video, we'll bring in the music, the singing, and the song that we sang. Did you get a few twangs on the? And maybe something about this. This, in a sense, is sort of like First World War imagery. But when we made it, when we put it up there, particularly with the gold and the globe on the top, it suddenly took on quite a spooky, quite sinister, dark, ritualistic strangeness that was I found almost shocking when I first sort of saw it. And for me, it's surprising how, even though we made the work ourselves, and usually when you make the work, you're not really that affected by it, but this piece does seem to have quite a strong impact on me anyway.
I think that's one of those things, though, when you make work, you're not always in control of what it is, or where it goes, or what its resonance might be. So that it's always a reveal, I think, sometimes, particularly when you work with somebody else, or two people.
Maybe we should say a little bit about the drums and things that we've been knocking out. This is just interesting from a point of sort of YouTube interest sort of point of view. These are drums that our friend Christoph made for us, and basically it's a pentagon, which itself is an interesting form, but just from a point of interest, the drums are made from they're not Coca-Cola bottles, but this one's a Canada Dry bottle, and you just cut the bottle, stretch it over, staple it, and then heat it up with an air gun or with a hairdryer, and it creates a really interesting percussion device, or a drum basically. And it's the same with the banjo. And the banjo is a mountain. It's our own design. We've designed this section, but the concept of this banjo is what's called a mountain banjo, and the mountain banjos were made by farming communities, small communities, individuals in America in the Appalachian Mountains, and they were made in the most basic fashion. And so this one is pretty basic. Often they didn't have frets. And so a lot of the American old-time music that came in a sense from Europe and from also mixed with the blues as well, was played on instruments like this. This design, in fact, apart from the actual shape of it, is actually taken from a guy called Frank Prophet, who was one of these characters back in the early part of the 1900s. And you can see many. He was fortunate enough to live into the period of recordings, and so field recorders like Alan Lomax, they recorded people like Frank Prophet playing, and you can go on YouTube and hear that. And these characters were. They came from families from Scotland, from Germany, and all this, emigrated across from Europe. So the notion of emigration is a big aspect of the work, and the music. Often the stories are retained within the music, within the folk songs, basically.